This is How to AI UXR, an 8-part series that explores how AI is being used across the research workflow, and even how it's exploding it. In each episode, I'll talk with someone who's volunteered to show a thing, so screens on. If you haven't seen it yet, the series pairs with the How to AI UXR map, a 5-page map that will help you pinpoint your AI maturity level and offers practical, real-world applications you can adapt for your research systems. Find the link in the show notes. I'm Kate Towsey, and this series is brought to you by Strela, the AI-powered customer research platform. In this episode, I'm joined by Llewyn Paine, a researcher and consultant who's been working with AI systems since long before most of us had ever even met an LLM. This is a more philosophical conversation. Llewyn and I talk about slowing down and leaning on the disciplines we already know, like jobs to be done and systems design. Llewyn also shares 3 lenses to use when you evaluate AI in research. And we talk about tea, mutant Ninja Turtles, and Pac-Man. If you've ever felt the pressure to AI everything, and who hasn't these days, and you don't want to become your organization's AI speed bump, this episode will give you important prompts to ask for evidence, name the risks, and design research systems that prioritize outcomes over output. Llewyn, we have just discovered that we are both tea fans.
That's right.
We're going to have to exchange a long list of teas. We've also discovered that neither of us are fruit tea flat fans, but we are green tea. Earl Grey is a great one.
Oh, yes. Good flavored white teas. Not always across the board, but white tea is great.
White tea. We're going to have a tea party one day.
I think we will.
So for those who don't know who you are, tell me, how did you, what is your journey into becoming an expert on how to AI UXR how to AI. I'm the first person to fall over.
Thank you. That's so nice of you. It's it's all good.
I'm going to keep this part in the podcast. How have you become an expert in how we AI UXR?
Okay, I will try to keep this brief, but I am a cognitive psychologist who researches emerging technologies. I've been doing this my entire career. I've worked on technologies from biometrics to robots. And as you can imagine, AI is kind of the latest big emerging technology that's really impacting us in research. And so it's kind of a continuation from the work I've done in emerging technology generally. And it tends to always have this focus of there's some big hype and there's a need to look at what the real user needs are and the actual capabilities of the technology and marry those things together to figure out where it can actually do what it says it does.
Yeah. And so how many years have you been aware of AI? Has it been years before most of us came across ChatGPT?
Oh, goodness. So my first AI project was probably around 2012.
Wow.
Now, AI is a huge umbrella. It covers many different types of technologies. But I've been working in this space for a long time. Came up with my first chatbot AI design principles not too long after that, I think 2016-ish. So it's been a while.
We're looking at the How to AI UXR map. I got it out straight this time, all in one sentence. What do you think the biggest misreads or misassumptions are that someone might make looking at a map like that? I mean, I wanted to sort of add to that. We've produced the map not going that this is the answer to all things forever in AI, but it offers a very good slice or a snapshot of how people are using AI across the world. I love that we can point out some of the things that you should watch out for.
Well, let me first say, I think it's so valuable that you have put this together because as researchers, I think sometimes we miss the opportunity to do research on ourselves and on our stakeholders. Knowing what we are doing and what the industry wants to do with this technology is the first step towards figuring out what we should be doing. And so I love looking at something like this and saying, this is where the appetite is. Now let's follow through and see what are the gaps where maybe it's not operating quite as we expect, and what are the opportunities to kind of bring it up to the full potential. We could talk about some specific things where I see common misconceptions with AI and user research. But looking just across the board, I think it's really important for us to recognize that just because a practice is popular or common at this point doesn't mean that it's actually good research practice, especially with AI, because it's just so new. And even the best researchers don't always have the full background to know where there can be kind of unexpected pitfalls.
Right. And so you're running workshops I've seen on LinkedIn when I've been stalking you around the world. And so I know, I assume at least, that you're spending a lot of time with people who are in the trenches figuring out how to AI UXR. Is there a story or a particular thing that you keep seeing that the sort of red flag keeps popping up for you?
That's a good question. I think maybe not a particular story, but a lack of lenses, I think. So when I think about using AI effectively in user research, I think there are 3 lenses that we need to be thinking about. There's the stakeholder lens. What do they need to get out of our research? There's the social science lens, which is all about understanding the human biases that come into play with AI, and there are absolutely a lot of those. But also the computer science lens, which is kind of like the social science lens, but instead of understanding human biases, you're understanding machine biases. And so what I tend to see as I'm working with teams across the world, as you said, is a lot of focus on the social science lens and not so much on the stakeholder lens and very little on the computer science lens.
So would the advice then be go out and actually, we have to understand this technology in order to use it, which is fascinating because, and the reason I pause is because in the past, I think, certainly for myself, we've just you get given a tool and you pick it up and it's been designed so you just need to understand the surface of it. I don't need to understand how to develop the tool. Even a light bulb, I'm constantly aware. I mean, a light bulb's just one example, and just a million things that are around me in my day-to-day life. Were they to disappear tomorrow, I would be stuck. I wouldn't know how to recreate glass or a light bulb or electricity or a radio, the internet. I would be stuck back just the most basics of existence. And I think we've gotten used to, as human beings, being given a tool from a previous generation and just using it. But I hear you saying that with AI, we need to actually understand how it works in order to use it well.
That's right. And I think what you're saying about looking at it on the surface is exactly the right way to call this out. At some point, we will get to the point where we have an intuitive understanding of large language models. We're already making a lot of progress. There's so much more sophistication in how researchers are working with LLMs today than how they were a year ago. But it's still an emerging technology. And that means that there are new models that are getting shipped all the time. You're having to figure out how they work within harnesses. It's just, and all of this is very counterintuitive. And it's specifically designed to have this surface appearance of something human. So it's a lot more deceptive than previous technologies, because all of the cues that we have about what's a good quality output, they're just baked into what we get out of the LLM. And so it can, at first glance, very much look like something is absolutely excellent. And it's only when you actually go through it with a rubric that you realize, oh, this quote is inaccurate. It missed important themes, if you're talking about some kind of analysis, or, maybe this is a bad experience for the user on the other end. But it's a lot harder to kind of get to that level of seeing where the cracks are in the facade, if you will.
I'm interviewing NamFam. That'll be tomorrow from DoorDash. And they are going to talk about harnesses because I know that that's a key theme for them. Can you give a quick definition of what a harness is for those who don't know?
Oh, I'm the wrong person to describe this, but if I can use a terrible analogy from my childhood, You remember Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles?
Yeah,
the bad guy Krang.
1980s.
So if you think of Krang, he was like this brain alien. You think of Krang as like the LLM, and he lived in this giant exosuit that gave him this body that gave him the ability to interact with the real world around him. So that is the exosuit is kind of the harness for the LLM, and Krang is the LLM. That's my metaphor.
I'm just so glad I asked that question.
It will completely be lost on anyone who was not born quite that far
back. The late
back.
70s or early 80s, I think it would have been.
There you go.
If a research team wants to implement AI, what's the first operational decision that they need to make before they touch any tools?
Good question. So, as you mentioned, I do a lot of AI for UX research workshops. And in those workshops, I tell researchers they need to understand the jobs to be done for their stakeholders before anything else. So that's about understanding the core job, which is, it's never to produce a report. It's usually to answer some kind of question. But then there are also supporting needs for that stakeholder. Things like, we need to get this research done quickly or with a low level of risk, or I need to be able to justify our decisions to a stakeholder. Maybe there's some reputation management involved. And you want to start from that jobs to be done framework, because all of these things are going to be impacted by AI tools. You know, for example, if you're working in a highly regulated industry, you're probably not going to be wanting to use a whole lot of AI because that's going to ramp up your risk. Whereas if you're working for a small startup and speed is the priority, then that's probably something that's going to be a lot more appropriate. So I think it's important to ground any AI tooling decision in what are those stakeholder needs, and also to be thinking about how do you measure them? How do you measure them at an organizational level, and also how do you measure them within the context of the AI tool?
What has been so fascinating throughout this production, and certainly in recording these podcast interviews, has been that almost everybody, and I could say everybody, I just don't, haven't thought through it carefully enough, but it's been a major theme, systems design. Let's go back to the basics of like 1950s and onwards systems design. What are we building and why? Take that moment to pause. Strategy. And part of that is jobs to be done, doing research on what we need to actually achieve. And so I feel that behind the scenes of this high technology and the hype around it is this need to go back to these basics that we know so well. Something else that I always giggle about is I find that now I'm using CSVs and PDFs and MD files or Markdown files. And so I feel that there's this odd retroness behind the technology at the moment. Are people rushing ahead with AI and forgetting about these amazing traditional, what we call are somewhat traditional skills that we have? And do you think it's important that as a wider world, we do stop and pause? It's a bit of a leading question because I'm sure you do, but what are you sensing out there?
You know, I love that example that you brought up, but it makes me think of my own, which is I've had to really rediscover my statistics in working with large language models. I was a cognitive psychologist. I did almost exclusively quant research for many years, but getting into industry, there was so much more of a focus on qual. It was something that I just wasn't using as much. But right away, when I started talking with researchers and training researchers on how to use these non-deterministic systems, all of a sudden you're talking about variability and needing to run controlled tests at scale, and all these things about, how do you test enough times and know that you're getting reliable results. It's all coming back in a really big way. So I think statistics is having kind of a comeback.
Yeah, interesting. So a comeback on multiple fronts.
Mm-hmm.
PDFs, CSVs, Markdown files, service design / systems design, stats. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I do hope that over the next year, as you said earlier, there's been such a massive shift in the attitude towards AI between June last year and now. And I expect in another year's time, we'll see a shift again. And I hope that shift will be an irony of slowing down as we use these tools to speed up. Can we as humans step back and think about how we speed up so that we speed up in all the right directions? That's what I hope I'd see in a year's time. Do you have any other hopes for in a year's time?
I always talk about the bad future and the good future. And I think for me, it's all about, do we choose to focus on output or outcomes? And with AI, it's so easy to focus on productivity metrics and being able to produce more reports, talk to more users in less time. But if we're not contextualizing that in terms of business outcomes, then I think that's actually a really bad future. It just it drives down the amount of expertise involved. You certainly don't need a researcher if you're just pulling a crank, but you're also not getting very good business decisions out of that kind of world. So I'd love to see more of the focus on, let's think about what we really provide to the business as researchers and research operations folks, and make sure that when we use AI, it's in support of those goals.
It's such an interesting point because I wrote an article that was published in February this year, 2026. And I had come up with this term, how to AI, no, not that one, I, me, mine AI. That's the right one. I seem to love these very complicated things to say. And I, me, mine AI comes from the Beatles song, I, me, mine, which is very much about me, and me. And it's not a terrible place to start with using an LLM to now, write a screener more easily, or in the map, we have this in the crawl level. You're replacing long done human tasks now with either automation or pairing up to brainstorm and co-create. The problem is, though, to your point about value to the organization, particularly when we start paying for tokens and paying for the use of that tool, is that activity is not necessarily adding value to the organization unless you are saving yourself a lot of time and reinvesting your saved time into something that is of equal or more value than you would have delivered previously. I just wanted to point out that I love that thought, because for me, we can gain value from these systems when we do the systems design, when we step back and we think, what system does my organization need? What value do I need to deliver? What is my strategy for delivering value? And then what parts of delivering that system that will provide that value are human? What parts are AI delivered? And how can we squeeze more out of what we do as humans to provide more work with integrity?
So well said. I really agree with that.
So next question is, on that point of outputs, is where do you see the biggest quality risks showing up right now in terms of data collection, synthesis, or distribution of insights? A second question to that, which I can remind you of a little bit later, is what guardrails actually work in practice, at least today?
So I like that division of those three, data collection, synthesis, and distribution. I think synthesis has been and will probably always be the highest risk area for user research. And ironically, that's also the place where we want to use it the most. And the core problem there is that the time savings you get from using LLMs in qualitative analysis, that's fundamentally at odds with doing the kinds of quality checks you need to really be sure that you're getting out of it what you expect. The more steps you give to the AI, the more time you save, but you also have a lot less idea what it's doing. Now, I'm not 100% across the board opposed to using AI in qualitative analysis, but I think it's all about understanding, again, what is the job to be done here and why are we doing it? And recognizing that there's a lot more risk involved with qualitative analysis via LLM than necessarily gets acknowledged. There's so much more to say on this. I think there are some other interesting points around data collection and the distribution piece, but I will end it there for the moment.
I suspect I could do an entire series just on evaluation and how you do evals. But it strikes me that here, I mean, I know some about evals, but I'm so far away from being an expert, so I'm not even going to start pretending. My sense is that because, to what you've said, that when you're using an AI, an LLM for synthesis, you need to be evaluating. If you're evaluating as an individual, that's quite a lot to set up and constantly do. And so then there is that question of return versus investment in terms of using this tool. And to your point, breaking it down to see what are the jobs to be done and what parts are best maintained by me as a human and what parts are best done by technology.
Oh, I think I'm going to cop out to that researcher answer of it depends. So I think there's a lot of moving pieces here. There's is this something that you can really effectively evaluate with evals? And also, what kind of issue are you trying to control for? What are you trying to achieve? One of the things that I like to point out when it comes to synthesis, qualitative analysis via LLM, is there's really two concerns. There's accuracy, which is the insight that the LLM is generating from the data actually representative of what's in that data set? And there's a second part of it, which is, are you actually finding the most interesting nuggets in that data set? So there's accuracy and there's also kind of this omission aspect
depth
to it. Yeah, depth. And we're getting better and better at the accuracy piece of that. That is something that evals and various pipelines can help you with. It can help you make sure that your quotes are more accurate and that they're accurately labeled as coming from the right participant. I don't know if we're ever going to get to a point where we can overcome the problem of LLMs aren't going to find the really deep and surprising insights because they're trained to look for patterns. They have a bunch of patterns in their training corpus, and that's all they're able to see. So there are some fundamental limitations that we may not be able to ever overcome, regardless of how good our evals are.
Interesting. So then eval then becomes a case of spotting the gaps so that we as humans know exactly where to fill.
But I don't know that the evals can spot the gaps in that case. But it can help you find the errors, the bad quotes, but you'll need to have a human probably go back through the entire data set to see, is there some really unique differentiated insight that we're overlooking here? And that comes back to the needs of your company. If you're just trying to get something out and you don't care about differentiation, you may not need that.
Yeah.
Other places it's really important.
I'm an ops person, so this may be my bias. But something that I discovered through making the How to AI UXR map is the place where AI is really shining and delivering value for research teams, for research ops teams, and for the companies that these teams work for is in more operational tasks, like particularly in education. We've got an episode with Michelle Bejan-Latia sharing a tool she's built in Notion with Notion agents that within 15 minutes of someone coming out of a product manager having done a research session, they get a really well-written and honest report on what they did well in the interview and what they didn't. And that is, it's got sort of operational knock-on effects in terms of the data she's got now access to and what can be done to help product managers and what, sort of understanding the skills that they're very strong at, the skills that they're not so strong at, and then designing education opportunities with them. So that's one example of something that is not about using AI for analysis and synthesis, but rather for the operational, the structure that sits under researchers. And so what I found interesting is that for me, those are the biggest opportunities. Even things like building agents within Slack bots or in other chat environments, that when someone asks a question, they're routed to the right person, like a support system. And again, that's not about replacing the skill of a researcher, but about enabling more effective operations, more effective connections. So I'm very curious as to where eventually the world lands on just how much of research needs to be done by an AI.
Mm-hmm.
I'm asking you for a crystal ball moment. But, if you were to look down the line, we could stick with a year. I mean, a year moves pretty quickly these days. Where do you have any sense of where things might land in terms of how AI is being used in teams?
Mm-hmm. Well, let me just say to start, I love the example of having the AI basically train the non-researcher in a research method, because that stands out to me as a perfect use of generative AI. One of the complaints that you'll see is that because LLMs are trained on large corpuses of data, they can really only ever get you to average performance. They won't get you to the level of a skilled expert. But when you're talking about democratized research with people who aren't trained researchers, getting to average is a big deal. That's wonderful. That's going to make for much better data. So I think that's already a great example. In terms of where we're actually going to end up, that is a lot harder. Ooh, this is just a tough one. I don't know that I can give you a definitive answer here.
Do you remember, we're again going back to the 1980s television theme, but do you remember 7 Up? It was like a documentary where they interviewed people at like 7 years old and then at 14 years old or whatever. I'm sort of making
vaguely.
it up.
Yes.
Yeah, it was called 7 Up or something along those lines. I'm pretty sure it was called that. And I feel like what we need to do is like a 7 months up. I mean, 7 years would be far too long in our trajectory, the sort of development of things. But it would be fascinating to do a check-in every 7 months and just check in and say, hey, what has changed in the space, as a bit of a thought experiment.
I love that. Yeah, it's just so hard to predict. And we haven't talked about my work curating the Designing with AI conference for Rosenfeld.
Yeah.
But that's basically what we are doing for the last 2 years. We start curating this conference 6 months in advance. And it's incredibly difficult to predict where the industry is going to be in 6 months. I think you can usually see sort of some signal about where things are going, like, okay, agents are going to be a big deal this year. But then things like the usage-based billing for all of the model providers just come out of nowhere, and then everything changes.
Yeah. And that's starting to happen now, right? Now.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's going to be such a shift, because now what I'm seeing is when you design the system that we've been talking about, I think it's going to force people to step back and design the system, because you can save tokens by way of design, right? That's
Absolutely.
what I'm hearing.
And researchers are experts at thinking about how you optimize context, because that's the same thing we do with surveys. We're always thinking about, we've got a limited access to this person's time and attention. How do we organize the information in a way that's going to get the most out of that exchange with them?
I am fascinated to see how that shifts things. I know in my own world, I work a lot in Notion, and they're now charging for tokens. And so I'm thinking, I'm obviously more thoughtful about how I use it. I haven't gotten to the level yet where I'm designing agents to be token efficient. But I'm sure I will get there. For those listening and going, tokens? What are tokens? I realized as I was doing the How to AI UXR map, there were so many new words. And tokens are Llewyn, you can correct me if I get this wrong, but they're like the currency. Seeing as we've been going to like 1980s, 1990s themes, we can stick with Pac-Man. And so Pac-Man has the little, is it blocks or something? I haven't looked at it in ages.
Yeah, little pills.
Little pills, exactly.
Yeah.
Tokens are like pills. They're like Pac-Man pills. They keep energizing, and they're the food for your AI agent.
Your word fragments that you feed in and get out.
On a completely different topic, and then we'll get back to my set of questions. But I realized yesterday that I've been getting to understand AI a bit more and how it passes information, and that it's very different from how a human brain passes information. And I started to wonder, do I even need to put spaces between words?
And you probably do.
Right.
Because spaces, and this is why I have a technology consultant, because when these kinds of questions come up, I want to make sure I get the answer right.
Right.
But my understanding is spaces are treated just like any other part of tokens. Like during the pre-training phase, you're breaking words up in ways that kind of allow for more efficient training because you're putting things together that co-occur.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, a space would be considered part of that. Again, unless I am mistaken about that, but I do believe so.
Because I was sort of noodling yesterday and going, I wonder if we ended up in a world where as humans we just started writing sentences with no spaces because AI consumes that way.
I know somebody who's been dealing with the token limits by using shorthand.
Right.
It's kind of like the caveman speak that people are doing. So different ways of trying to shrink down how many lines of text you have to feed into the system. But there are trade-offs with that because then there's potentially less in the training that may map back to that.
When I'm chatting with my agents, I always make sure to use full sentences and spell correctly. It's very, very formal. It's like a Victorian tea party. And it's because I feel like I'm training how I wanted to produce content back to me as well. Whether that is true or not is a different story. But I kind of feel like if I speak to it that way, it will give me content back that is in that same shape.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's feeding that into the context. And that means that what it's basically doing is predicting what text is plausible to come next. And it's not plausible to bring in an entirely different conversational style. So absolutely.
Yeah, okay. This limited series is brought to you by Strela, the AI-powered customer research platform. We're taking a short pause to hear from Strela's co-founder, Priya Krishnan, and her perspective on this conversation.
Hi, I'm Priya Krishnan, one of the founders of Strela, and we are an end-to-end AI customer research platform. We use AI to help you come up with the right questions to ask, then run voice-based AI-moderated interviews and synthesize the results instantly. You can think of us as this trusted research partner that takes you from question to insight, developing, running, and analyzing real customer interviews in just a few days rather than weeks. Llewyn said something early on that reframed the whole AI and research conversation for me. She talked about the bad future and the good future. And the line between them was simple. Do we focus on output or on outcomes? It's so easy, she said, to chase productivity metrics, more reports, more users talked to in less time. But if none of that ties to a real business outcome, it's actually a bad future. It drives the expertise out of the work. As she put it, you don't need a researcher if you're just pulling a crank. And Kate added the other half. The time you save with AI only becomes valuable if you reinvest it into something of equal or greater worth than what you would have done before. The saving isn't the point. What you do with it is. And at Strela, we face this question all the time, and we work hard to stay on the right side of this line. The lazy version of an AI research tool is a crank. Push a button, get more reports faster. We're deliberately not building that. We are building a tool that acts as a partner to the researcher, not a replacement. We aim to take the grunt work off the researcher's plate, specifically so their time goes back to the part that needs a human, the judgment layer. Speed and scale aren't the prize. They're what buys the researcher room to do the work that only they can do.
Thanks, Priya. Find out more about Strela at strela.io. Back to the episode. You wrote that nobody wants to be a team's AI speed bump, even when it protects the users. What did you mean by that? You wrote that in a blog post, right? Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, it was. And it's actually not my quote. I believe it's from Owen Hammonds at World Usability Day last year in Austin. But it's a good quote. And I talked to so many researchers who are afraid to push back on any AI, even patently bad AI applications, because they don't want to look like a Luddite. They don't want to be the person who's perceived as slowing things down at their company. I think it's also the case that nobody feels like an expert. So even if you think maybe this is not the way we want to do things, you second guess yourself and feel like, do I really know? But we don't want to get so focused on moving fast as researchers that we sacrifice what makes us effective as researchers. I think it's very easy to get to that place where we're focused on pulling the lever to produce the deliverable. And at that point, you don't need a researcher for that. So one of the things I've been hearing Paul Ford talking about, who's one of our speakers at Designing with AI this year, is reasserting our expertise and using the AI, but also recognizing the places where our unique discernment brings something extra valuable into the equation. So I think you can be a good, speed bump in a way.
Slowing the traffic down. When is the conference coming up?
It's next week. So it will be passed by the time this comes out.
Yeah, it will be. But anyone listening, you can keep an eye out for it in 2027.
That's right.
In practical terms, what does good friction look like and what is unhelpful friction? And I suspect that the speed bump is closely related to this because you're ultimately creating friction to slow someone down.
Yeah. And I think I'm going to keep coming back to this idea of discernment and those 3 lenses I talked about earlier. I think slowing down to ask questions about what do our stakeholders actually need here? How are AI methods going to interact with our human biases? And what are the errors and biases that machines are bringing into the equation? I think pausing to ask those questions is not really being a speed bump. It's protecting the business and staying focused on why we're actually doing the work in the first place.
Yeah. What other hard-won lessons have you learned in your journeys around companies and with people attending your workshops about getting stakeholders to trust AI-supported research outputs? I mean, that makes the assumption that is a problem. A year ago, I would have said that is a problem, but the landscape seems to have changed. Where do you think we are now with that?
So that is a hard one, isn't it? And it's different for each relationship in a way. I guess what I would say is convincing stakeholders to trust AI-supported research is probably never my goal. I'm there to understand what their needs are. And if they're skeptical about AI or if there's some other reason why AI isn't working for them, that's something that I need to understand as a researcher. Going back to that jobs to be done, I need to understand what the needs are. Is this an accuracy concern? Is it a reputational concern? And if there is a misunderstanding there about what AI can actually do, then fine, we resolve that. But overall, I'm here to support the needs of the business and the needs of that stakeholder. So it's less about convincing them to use AI and more about having a good enough relationship with them where I can make a recommendation they're going to trust and where I know my tools well enough to know that I'm not going to recommend something that harms their needs.
What I'm seeing, at least this year, is that there is massive enthusiasm for AI and not enough questioning
yes,
what's out there. So I'm going to try a fancy word here. The corollary is it's only like 9 o'clock in the morning here, so is with no coffee yet, or even Earl Grey tea for that matter.
That's impressive. I can't start my day without tea.
So the opposite to that is the corollary is how do we? This relates to the speed bump, but are you seeing that people are moving so fast, they just want everything AI'd, that in fact it's not. I'm trying to gather my thoughts here because I'm wanting to make sure we don't go back to the speed bump question. It's not just about slowing them down, but it's about educating them as to this is a very good place to trust this. This is a place not to trust it. Because the reason I ask this is I'm gathering my thoughts now. It's all gelling together. The reason I ask this is oftentimes with AI, it seems to me that there is now a greater distance between the human who is behind this work and the person consuming it. We have had that to some degree with research reports, which traditionally have not been read nearly as much as researchers would have liked. But oftentimes the researcher would be in the room. I'm not saying always, but very often they'd be in the space doing a presentation or be part of the team. But now it feels like with repositories that you can go and ask a question and it will dig up what research exists, that gap is distant. So how do we train people or get them to stop to question, is this correct? Have you seen any novel approaches to that problem? Are you seeing that problem?
I absolutely am seeing that problem. And I love that you're calling it out because when I think about what the future is for researchers, I think the more we can educate ourselves about what AI is truly good and bad at, the more we can really play that expert role in organizations. There's less of a need for us if we're just a mouthpiece for an LLM. But bringing that expertise where we really understand the tools has a huge value. Now, in terms of how to bring that education into our organizations, it is hard. One of the things that I have seen my workshop participants do is, we do a lot of exercises in the workshop where we're kind of doing manual evals, where we're having the entire group of attendees run an analysis, and then they're manually going through and saying, oh, look, here are all these places where errors are creeping into this. So I'm having workshop participants who are then taking those kinds of exercises back to their stakeholders, even non-research stakeholders, just to help them be aware, oh, look, this may look good at face value, but actually there's other things to be concerned about here. So that's one approach I'm seeing.
You've just given me an interesting idea for a production next year that no one shall steal from me in the meantime. But wouldn't it be cool? We've seen lots of prompt libraries, and I haven't seen any eval libraries around. But it would be interesting to see a library of evals, so that you wouldn't have to create this on your own. You could go to your library and pick out some examples and use that to show to your stakeholders.
I want so much for us as an industry to start talking more about how we're evaluating AI tools and to share that data with each other. I think that's the biggest gap in where we are right now. We're taking so much on faith just because other people are doing this, or a tool maker says it's a good idea, or some AI influencer claims that they have tested this, but without actually seeing what a good test looks like and actually looking at that data. It can be very hard to tell what's really credible. So I love that.
This is I'm gonna keep that in my mind and see if I can pull something together for 2027. This is a very good segue into my final question, which is around, for organizations that are rushing to adopt AI into all things and everywhere, where do you see the biggest mismatch between what teams or even vendors claim their systems do versus what they actually do? What is the gap? Mm-hmm. Is there a gap?
I think it's no one particular gap. I think it's exactly what I was just talking about. What concerns me is how many researchers and teams never ask for proof, maybe don't feel like they can, maybe don't know what good proof looks like. But because of that, it puts them in this position of just kind of blindly trusting and trying to find some authority who seems like they know what they're talking about. When in fact, it's very hard to find people who really bring together the right sets of expertise. The AI influencers often don't have enough of a technical lens. There's the tool makers probably are bringing in some good practices, but there's not a lot of transparency about exactly what they're evaluating and how and what their pipelines are. I've worked with some tool makers, and it's very hard to get them to share those things because it's viewed as their competitive advantage. But it's a great thing for the field if we can start talking more about how we know these tools are really reliable, and if we can share data around these claims. It only helps everybody.
So to wrap up, the things that I've really taken from this conversation has been tea. We need to drink more tea.
Can't disagree with that.
Lots of different types of tea. But in all seriousness, we have to slow down for ourselves, not just being a speed bump for the organization or excellent friction, but to slow down for ourselves and go back to systems design, jobs to be done, which requires research and thinking through what am I actually trying to achieve in doing this. The second thing that I take out of this is that when you bring a new technology or build a new technology within your organization, AI is making it so easy to build our own things now, where we've got a kind of transparency. But the thing with AI is when you're prompting something into existence, the transparency isn't there. And so wherever you are getting the capability from, you need to build an eval practice. Learn as much as you can from evals. It does feel like a bit of a mystical art at this point, and I'm sure that will improve over time. Go to Llewyn's workshop so that you can design a really good eval practice into everything you do. Was there anything else that you wanted to make sure that the audience takes away, a third point?
I think going to that, just a corollary to the point about evals is, a year ago, you really had to do evals yourself to figure out if anything was doing what it said it was. But now it is becoming more of a known quantity, and you can partner with engineers to run the evals you need. But a lot of times it's also just knowing what a good evaluation looks like and feeling empowered to ask for it. It may not be you who has to do that,
right?
But you should feel empowered to say, I want to understand how my tools work, and it is not too much to request some evidence.
Yeah.
You're a researcher after all.
Yeah. Okay, great. That's such a good takeaway, because I do think that the fact that we can now build, a lot of researchers I've spoken to and research ops professionals, there is a sense that now I'm here on my own with my cursor or my Claude Code or whatever thing you've chosen to work with, my dust. And now I must just do this all on my own. And in fact, I mentioned earlier that there will be an interview with Nam Pham from DoorDash. And the reason they've been so successful with the tools that they've built is because they've done it with engineering and with product and with others across the organization. So same with evals. You don't have to sit there and figure out on your own how to do it and carry it all. You can go and ask for help.
100%.
Llewyn, it's been such a pleasure to have this chat with you. Thank you very, very much for your time. I will share where to contact you in the show notes. Where is a good place in general?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I am one of the only Llewyns on there, or at my website at llewynpaine.consulting.
If you can remember how to spell Llewyn's name, but it will be in the show notes. You said that it's originally a Welsh name, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, amazing. Which makes sense. My father used to live in Wales, and the spelling was nothing like the pronunciation.
I make it difficult on everybody.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
This is great. Thanks so much, Kate.
Thanks for listening to How to AI UXR. This series was produced by the Research Ops Review and sponsored by Strella, the AI-powered customer research platform. Find the How to AI UXR map in the show notes. The map details how research professionals worldwide are augmenting UXR at the crawl, walk, and run levels of complexity.